Um, it is likely live right now.
Likely.
I mean, it's always, it does the loading thing, but like it's already loaded. I don't understand the loading thing. Anyone on YouTube who sees me talk about the loading thing, tell me what you think of this loading thing.
I feel like, well, anyway, okay. Hello, YouTube, and also non YouTube. We're here on this lovely Friday with Zoe, who's based in Pittsburgh, does a bunch of cool stuff, including flute and businessy things. And we're gonna have a chat about all that stuff. Probably not that much about flute, but yeah, over to you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, if we were doing this in person, it would be, super a lot less awkward because when people are in the room, when people step out of the room, and one of the wild parts of this virtual atmosphere is just all the feeling like you have to be really thought through on transitions and introductions and conclusions and things, and I'm not worried about any of that because what we're doing is we're taking real human connection and we're making it happen through the internet. So I probably won't mention the fact that I play flute more than once in the next however long we're together. I'm going to be talking about music entrepreneurship today. Some of the observations that I've had as somebody who's actively involved in music entrepreneurship and arts administration, and some of the ways that I am learning and challenging myself to approach entrepreneurship in order to be more humanist and more equitable. So for those of you who are here in the Zoom room today and are able to engage, I'm going to be sharing my screen just so that we have more visual to look at and you don't have to sit here and look at just at me talking at you. I will ask you occasionally to engage in the chat box to just drop a word or two about things. But if at any point you have questions or you want to engage, just go ahead and unmute yourself and jump right in. I might not be able to see if you raise your hands, depending on what's going on with screen sharing. So just don't be afraid to cut me off and jump right in. I want this to feel as much like a conversation as we're able to navigate in this Zoom room. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right, and can I just get a thumbs up or something if you can see this slideshow? Okay, Shoshana says we can see it. We're good to go. I trust her. Okay.
Zoe, we can see
Okay.
it. I'm getting the presenter view.
You are?
Yeah.
Okay. Let
Yeah.
me...
I think if you use slideshow or something, that might do it. I don't know.
I should be able to...
I think it's the swap
swap the
displays up
display.
there.
Yeah. Is that
Yeah.
better?
Mm-hmm.
Great. All right. Okay. Yep, so jump right in because I'm minimizing faces then. So jump in if you have any questions because I won't necessarily be able to see see faces or see I'll pull up the chat when I need to. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to be talking about music entrepreneurship in the 21st century, the way that we find it now, and the ways that I'm going to challenge us to think about it in the future. So let's do this. All right, so we've seen a growth in entrepreneurship in the music industry recently. We've seen schools starting to offer professional development courses. We're seeing a lot of influencer culture in classical music. We have these, online courses being offered or high value content that you can purchase through social media. And we're seeing the popularity of higher education degrees in arts administration, different types of interdisciplinary performance, electroacoustic performance, movement and music, things like that. We're seeing these new programs popping up that are more about creative expression and less about the neo-Western way of creatively expressing ourselves. So how did I get into all of this entrepreneurship? This is the one time I'll mention that I play the flute and the piano. That's what got me into classical music. I went to Oberlin Conservatory and did my undergrad in flute performance and English literature. And then I moved to Pittsburgh and did my master's at Carnegie Mellon University, which is how I ended up in Pittsburgh today. So I graduated 3 years ago and I have stuck around. As I started teaching at a couple of schools in the area. I'm on faculty at Westminster College and Chatham University, and I also teach piano lessons at a local K through 12 school system. But during that time, I also got very invested in entrepreneurship and arts education. A year into my master's, I established a 501c3 nonprofit new music ensemble called Nat 28. And I ran that group for 5 years before stepping down from my leadership role. But the group is still out there and figuring out how to navigate quarantine performance life. And so in addition to that, I loved being in charge of that ensemble. But I also started to find all these other applications for arts administration. I got involved with Make Music Day Pittsburgh, with the Pittsburgh Festival of New Music, with helping my students at all of my different universities to find more expanded opportunities for their own career success. I created and teach a professional development course at Westminster College now. And long story short, I found out that I'm actually quite good at these entrepreneurship things, and I really enjoyed it. And I still love to perform, but I kept getting pulled in that direction. And I was figuring out how to, leverage social media to get record deals, or how to brand my business to get more students, and all of these things that we've all heard talk about quite a lot. And then about a year ago, I started participating in an anti-racist Raja Yoga teacher training program that was initially a 13-month program, but thank you to the coronavirus, will be about 18 months long. And as I started to really analyze the relationship between self-care and community care with anti-racism, anti-patriarchy, anti-ableism, and anti-capitalism, I started to sort of feel like I was living a double life for a while. I was noticing that I would go to yoga training and study all of these anti-racist things and take courses and read books and be in community with people and feel very ethically grounded. And then I would go to the entrepreneurship side of things and feel like my values were just different. And it started to really feel like this double life that I was leading. And so I wanted to question whether entrepreneurship had to be the way that we see it now, and whether there wasn't a more ethical way to pursue music entrepreneurship. I was initially attracted to entrepreneurship because it is very intoxicating and it is very ego boosting. And there are good, great, wonderful sides to being an entrepreneur, and I'll talk about many of those as well. But I just really wanted to think about, was there a more ethical way to engage with entrepreneurship in the arts? And so I'm going to go over, when you get into entrepreneurship, you start to see a lot of words come up again and again and again, and a lot of concepts. And I'm going to go over just some of those and talk about the way that it might make us feel engaging with this industry. Niche, venture capital, brand. We'll talk a lot about branding. This idea that you've got to spend money to make money. Networking. The idea of making millions, your first 6-digit, your first 7-digit income. You see that language a lot. This idea of followers, conversion, likes, mogul, training your audience, human resources, calls to action, human capital, a hustle or a side hustle, and then a lot of language around girl boss and boss babe, things like that, the female empowerment aspect of entrepreneurship. And I started to notice some trends in this language that we use. So let me just draw attention to a couple of these things. The idea of a hustle or a side hustle that we talk about a lot now. The definition of hustle is forced to move hurriedly or unceremoniously in a specified direction, obtained by forceful action or persuasion, a fraud or swindle. And this is the language that we use to describe the thing that we're choosing to do with our life. And that caused me pause. This idea that we hear again and again from life coaches and entrepreneur coaches and business coaches that you have to spend money to make money is so unbelievably privilege blind. The idea that there are people that have that money to spend in order to make money is this, we'll talk a lot about the self-sustaining aspects of capitalism. And then one of my least favorite terms that we come across a lot when we talk about entrepreneurship and business is human resources. And when we say that, what we mean is the management and development of employees overseeing the organization's human capital. And that's what we mean. We're literally seeing humans as resources for capital. So what should human resources actually be? Well, human resources are water, shelter, food, safety, internet, community. Those are what human resources should mean. And yet we've used it to literally mean the resource mining of humanity. And so I'd love for you to drop into the chat when you think about entrepreneurship and you hear some of these words associated with it, how does it make you feel? And this can be just a one word, it could be a short phrase, a couple of words. And so I'll just give you a second to drop some of those words into the chat. Yeah. So some of the words coming through, I see gross, yuck, self-promotion, uncomfortable, conflicted, sleazy, capitalistic, but in a negative connotation, impossible. The term human capital made me think of slavery. That's important. Uncomfortable coming up again. Yeah, exactly. And this is how I started to feel after spending several years leveraging these exact things, in order to have the career. And so move this. All right. Ego entrepreneurship. So that's funny that bullet is popping up first. Okay. I started to notice that entrepreneurship was truly an ego pursuit. And so I started to think of this negative aspect of entrepreneurship as ego entrepreneurship. And so my bullet that didn't get pulled into the animation there is lack of transparency. And that's something we see a lot in entrepreneurship, this presenting of yourself as having all of the answers, as being the expert. Making promises that nobody could possibly guarantee. Follow my 10 steps and you will make 6 figures. We see privilege blindness. So I brought up some of that, this idea of spending money to make money. The idea of the 9 to 5 is the thing that you must aspire to escape. The 9 to 5 is presented as the prison that you're trying to break out of. We see a lot of bootstrapping. We see a lot of you're just not working hard enough. I see a lot of memes on Instagram saying, while you're watching Netflix, somebody else is working towards their dream, and this shaming of rest, which is absolutely necessary under capitalism. This idea of venture capital, which is high risk, high reward business management. And the whole girl boss, boss babe movement is truly blind to privilege, and to the inclusivity and of feminism and of the feminist movement. We see all of this is so consumer centric. You do all of these things. What's the desired outcome? Making more money. That's how it's presented to us. If we leverage our social media correctly, we will make sales. If we manage our network correctly, we will achieve people who pay us. If we brand ourselves correctly, it's so that we can get more clients. And so the end goal always becomes making more money. And so within that process, we lose the humanity. And so much of the language that I just put up there is dehumanizing and quite literally disembodying. So you're encouraged to niche down, to be super, super specific in who you are and what you do, which runs contrary to the complexities of humanity and the multifacetedness of being a human. We'll talk a lot about branding and how that relates to the dehumanization that we see in the arts. Words like followers, likes, clients, all of this language that's not acknowledging that people are entire humans. This idea of training your audience to click on or interact with your content. Conversion, human resources. Lack of transparency we mentioned. A lot of the rhetoric we see that we know is just trying to sell us something. We see the ego or the self as more important than the community or the society. And I'll talk a little bit about this idea of startups, or this idea of everybody starting their own venture that we are absolutely in the midst of right now. The last couple years, everybody's starting their own thing. And we'll talk about that. And this idea that we do all of this so that we can make millions and so we can have comfort and we can have security. And oftentimes the piece that's left out of that is the actual community or society to which we belong. And all of this together creates a current status of entrepreneurship that is not sustainable. It's not healthy. It's not community supporting. And we're going to run out of resources. We cannot keep paying people to help us make millions. That's, we're not going to sustain that way. So before I jump into some of my thoughts about some specific aspects of entrepreneurship, I'm going to give just a couple of disclaimers that are important to me, that are part of my value system in presenting this work. The first is that I'm not here to tell you how to monetize. So I'm not here to tell you how to leverage social media to make those 6-figure and 7-figure incomes. My focus is on how we can create careers that are more humane and more ethical, which ties into my second disclaimer, which is that there's no shame in surviving under capitalism. So I don't disparage anybody for doing what they need to do to survive financially in the capitalist world and society that we find ourselves in. So although I'm here to say maybe there's a way that is more humane and more accessible and more equitable, if you're not able to do those things without losing your financial security, that's the reality of the world that we live in. I am aware that I have been able to ask these questions about entrepreneurship because of the privilege that I have in society. So that's the first really big point that I want to make. These are possibilities and things to think about. My third disclaimer is that if God is a #bossbabe, then I'm probably going to go to the bad place after you hear some of my thoughts on this. I am going to be pointing out what I think are some very, very violent and harmful things in the current field of music entrepreneurship. And fourth, and this disclaimer I put ahead of everything, I am a finite and fallible human being. So I think that part of the lack of transparency we see in entrepreneurship is people presenting themselves as infallible, as experts who have all the answers, who have already arrived as an expert. And I work very intentionally in my own practice of presenting, lecturing, and educating to be transparent with you all that all I can share with you today is the best ideas that I have today on the 24th of July in the year 2020. And that as I'm growing and expanding and learning new things, I'm taking in new evidence and new ideas. And these things very well may change. And it may be that there are people in the room today who are going to push back, and I look enthusiastically forward to that, to help me expand my worldview around these things. And so I always like to say that because I think that we feel pressure when we're up in front of a group to hold on to this idea of perfection and finality. And I am only ever arriving at these ideas. I have never arrived. So I'd love to hear in the chat, in a word or a couple, what is appealing about entrepreneurship? What are the things that tempt us or make us feel like it could be great to be an entrepreneur or to have these entrepreneurial skills? I'll give you a minute to think about that. Type something in the chat box. So the ability to make projects that you want to see happen. It's really good. Enabling my vision and dreams as an artist and Denverite. Yeah. Independence, the ability to function with fewer confines to the existing structures. Great. Financial gain, power in society, and material comfort. Absolutely. I'll give you just a minute more. Self-sufficiency, not relying on someone else for stability. Creating community and audience via the reach that it gives us. It would be nice to make a living doing music, since that's what we all need to do under capitalism anyways. Absolutely. Bringing innovative ideas into existence. These are all wonderful. These are all exactly all the points that make entrepreneurship powerful. All right. One more. I'm not a big fan of the word itself, but seconded on the ability to make money from personal projects without compromising them as much. Yeah. Great. Okay. So, yeah, what could entrepreneurship be? You guys touched on all of it. It could be, well, let's talk about what the word means. Entre comes from enter, and preneur from grasping, understanding, or capturing. So etymologically, entrepreneurship means entering into something and then seeking understanding. And that's a wonderful thing at its root. And you guys touched on all of this. Empowerment, security, not reporting to the man, defining your own boundaries, flexibility, moving off of the conveyor belt, having less linearity. So we have a conveyor belt in classical music where you go to music school and then you get a faculty position and or an orchestra job. That's the conveyor belt that we are all put on our freshman year of college. And entrepreneurship is the thing that allows us to step off of that conveyor belt and do something else. We also see more opportunity or greater opportunity for service. And a lot of you said that, bringing these projects to your communities and things like that. So I mentioned before that capitalism is a self-sustaining system. So what I mean when I say that is this idea that ironically, in order to divest from capitalism, in order to live anti-capitalistly, requires the very same privileges that can only be given through capitalism. So it actually requires winning the capitalism game in order to exit capitalism, right? That's what I mean when I say that I don't disparage anybody for surviving and thriving in whatever way they need to. However, I think that all of us can find little pockets of resistance, and those can be as small or as large as we are capable of. So as musicians, capitalism is now forcing us to expand beyond those linear paths that we've historically seen that I just mentioned, where we go to music school and we graduate, and we're either in the 1% where we're a great soloist and we travel around playing solos. We are in academia in some way or another. We join an orchestra or other very large established organization of some kind. But capitalism sees us actually having too many talented people now to fit the jobs that are out there, right? And so schools are finally starting to recognize the value in equipping musicians to succeed outside of the practice room, because we're finally facing a time when being a fantastic player guarantees nothing for us after school. And this was true, I want to say this was true before COVID-19, but now we're seeing this accelerated, like, super speed, right? Because we're seeing a lot of these stable linear paths that we've depended upon our entire careers struggling and folding. And that's absolutely tragic and heartbreaking, and we're losing some wonderful organizations. And so now the future of performance, as we know it, is more uncertain than ever. And the economic crisis that we're all facing now disallows us the patience to wait it out. So we're going to lose great players to other industries over these next few months. Additionally, classical music is facing a morality crisis right now with the widespread media coverage and conversations and activism around Black Lives Matter and other machines of equity. And so classical music has historically refused to adapt to modernity and to face its violent and inequitable past and present. So our industry is quite literally being left behind by a modern world that is desperate to humanize. We're also facing an increasingly automated future. Within our lifetime or the generation after us, we're going to see a society where there are way more people than viable human jobs. And so we're going to have to start to redefine people as no longer valued by their job. So that's a good news for the arts. That's good news for the arts when we get there, because we're going to need meaning and we're going to need humanism more than ever. It's really tough for artists as we think about how we're going to get from here to there. So I do believe that in this automated future, the arts will become more essential than ever as we start to seek greater joy and meaning in a life where our value is no longer derived just from our work. However, I don't believe that this post-capitalist future is going to happen in any of our career spans. And so I'm really interested in the ways in which music entrepreneurship can be actively anti-capitalist and actively humanizing in the here and now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into depth with 3 aspects of entrepreneurship with which I think all of you will have some familiarity, no matter where you are in your careers or what your focus is. And then we're going to explore these 3 facets of music entrepreneurship. So I want to posit this thesis that when we intentionally place value on the community over the ego, entrepreneurship becomes a tool for liberation from capitalism. I'll read that one more time. When we intentionally place value on the community over the ego, entrepreneurship becomes a tool for liberation from capitalism. So the first aspect of entrepreneurship we're going to talk about is branding. And I'm going to say that branding currently has a branding problem. What is branding? Where does the idea of branding come from? You can see in the picture here, it was how we marked and how we continue to mark livestock. There's also plenty of violent, awful historical examples, and only some of them are listed there, of when we have actually used branding to mark humans as capital and as property. And so somebody had mentioned in the chat before that they were thinking of slavery with some of these words that come up. And absolutely, this idea of branding is not unrelated to American slavery. So we see branding historically as being a literal tool of ownership and dehumanization. So, but what does branding mean when it comes to arts entrepreneurship? It means the colors and the logos and the fonts we use, and it means the way that we make our clients feel, and it means what is our niche and all of these things. So, by definition, a successful brand is limiting. That's what it's meant to be if it's doing its job under its current definition. A brand, as we currently define it, cannot and should not grow. It's meant to be this solid, consistent thing. And yet we ask people to evolve, adapt, admit mistakes, and learn new things. So if we're encouraging people to brand themselves in these inflexible ways, how are we supposed to also demand that they grow and are accountable for evolving as human beings? We're told to niche down, niche down, niche down. What is your specific focus in your career? But that specificity is entirely antithetical to the human experience. We are not niches. We are not focused on one thing. We are multifaceted, complex beings. And so I always got stuck with how to distill myself to a brand. And I realized that the way we teach it now, personal branding facilitates your own commoditization. It's actually taking the multifacetedness of your humanity and distilling it into a commodity that's sellable so that you can make money off of yourself. And I'm really curious, the future of my research is going to go into more of what that does to our psyche and how that changes our self-esteem. I can't imagine that it has no effect. But at its best, what can branding be? It's an experience that we're promising. It's saying, if you work with me in whatever capacity and whatever I am interested in doing and you are interested in collaborating with me on, here is the experience you will receive. In other words, it's an intentional first impression. So we all already have our natural human brands. When we meet somebody in a room, remember way back when, rack your memory, when you used to meet people and shake their hand, and they would get some sort of sense of who you are and what you were about. And sometimes they were right and sometimes they were wrong. Some of us are better at giving an accurate first impression than others. But branding is just the thing that allows us to have intentionality around that first impression, or this is what it should be. So for me, that means making my brand value-centric and story-driven. So I'll talk a little bit about what I mean when I say value-centric and story-driven here in a moment. But I want this brand, I believe that brands should be driven by what we believe and what our core values are and the story that brought us to these things. I see something popped up here in the chat. Awesome. Okay. So Seamus put a Pepsi logo redesign study in there that I'm looking forward to checking out. Okay. And branding should be a mechanism for community care. It should be about the community. It should be transparent. It should allow for growth. So when I'm approaching personal branding with a client, and I'm talking them through how to create their personal brand, there are 3 steps that I have them work through. And the first is to get super clear about their core values. And so I said that this brand should be super value-centric. So it has to start with, what are your core values? And the reason that I started creating brands this way is because if we create it based on anything superficial, such as what our niche is, then we have no room to grow. But if we create it with our core values, then we can grow and expand and adapt, because those core values are almost always going to be at the core, unless we go through a massive human experience that changes us absolutely at the core. Essentially, we can grow and evolve and still have the same core values. And so for me, that allowed me to be more truly me and to continue to adapt without having to rebrand myself every year that I grew up a little bit. And also, aren't these core values what we really should know if we want to be in relationship with anybody? Any kind of relationship, any kind of working, collaborating relationship. Your niche can and probably should change and adapt over time. So an example of that is, my niche used to be, I am a flutist, okay, so I mentioned it twice now, who specializes in contemporary and interdisciplinary performance. So if I built my brand around that 5 years ago, and that's what I was known for, and you were like, Zoe Sorrell, she's the one who makes all the wacky sounds on the flute and dances around while she's playing. Yes, that is true. But that's no longer where I'm spending the majority of my career time. So do I have to go through a massive rebranding and redefining just because the way that I'm applying my values has pivoted? If my brand is built on those values, however, and what I stand for, then I could smoothly transition from teaching flute lessons to consulting with businesses and to writing books without ever being inauthentic or misrepresenting myself. So if you know that what I stand for is sustainability, curiosity, and accountability, then whatever I'm doing with that is just the expression of those values. So your mission may change, your vision may change, but the values that are driving those things will most likely not change. So that's the first thing that I walk through with clients. At the end of this presentation, I will put my email address up on the screen and some of my social media handles. And what I have is a massive core value exercise that I do with clients to help them get clear about their core values and what those are. And if you're interested in getting that exercise, just shoot me an email and I will send it to you. So the second thing that I have clients do is consider their community. And I'm really interested in community first language rather than this idea of customers, clients, or audiences. I think that community is way more humanizing and empowering of a term and a way to think about this. Whereas customer, clients, and audience is defining these people by what they can do for us. What are they going to buy from me? How are they going to hire me? How are they going to clap for me? When are they going to stand up? What are they going to do for me? And so that's all ego language. Whereas a community implies a group of people working together. And so I have a couple of rules that I always hold very close to my heart when I consider a community. And this is that community members, whether those are residents of a geographic community or members of a non-geographic community, community members are the best experts on the community in which they reside or exist. So those community members are the experts on the community. And this will become important a little later on. All community members have skills, abilities, and talents that they can contribute to the community. All community members have skills, abilities, and talents that they can contribute to the community. And thirdly, that a strong community is built upon the talents and resources of all of its community members. So when I'm approaching and thinking about community, those are the things that are important to me. So do we care about the demographics of our community members? If you study traditional branding and marketing, you spend a lot of time figuring out the age and the ethnicity and the income and the geographic level of the people that you're trying to serve. And for me, those are not the human defining things that will create connection with a community. I'm much more interested in thinking about the values, the fears and insecurities, the needs and desires, the skills, joys, and passions of the people with which I want to be involved. And So is this how our country operates? No. Speaking as an American, I can say that our country is not built to value people on their joys, passions, fears, insecurities, and skills. It's built on demographics. But I do think that there are places within our entrepreneurial pursuits where we can refuse to be invested in that side of people and to see people for their humanity. And then the mindset becomes about transparency and trust. And what I mean by that is that I'm coming to you today as somebody who's built a career and is building a career in entrepreneurship, coaching and consulting with others, and that I value sustainability and humanism. But rather than coming to you at the beginning of today's talk and defensively positioning myself as the expert on this topic and showing you my resume to show you how smart I am, I came to you and authentically said, I don't have all these answers and that I'm optimistic about being challenged and expanded. So then I trust you that if you are a music entrepreneur who values my insights and perspectives, then maybe you'll employ me to offer my skills. And in the meantime, what I'm doing is going to lift up each of you and employ and empower you to lend your skills to this community. So I'm just going to check the chat here real quick. Great. Okay. Thanks for being here, Brian. All right. The third thing that I tell clients when it comes to personal branding is to tell your story. And so I mentioned that this should be story driven. And what I've done now is tell you multiple times my story of how I ended up in this field and in this niche and in these interests and why this is where my curiosity is going professionally. And that's what creates actual human connection. So if I run across somebody online and I see that they also value sustainability and authenticity and accessibility and equity, and I read their story and that spells to me that they are transparent and they are growing, that's the people I want to work with. I'm not actually looking to see who used the right hashtags or who has the colors that resonate with me the most on their Instagram board. I'm looking for people whose stories and whose values resonate with me. So after thinking about branding, we have to talk about social media because that's one of the biggest ways that we interact with one another and the biggest ways that we see branding expressed. And I put up there social distancing media because I don't know about you all, but this COVID-19 experience has proven to me truly the power of social media in my life, both personally and professionally. And so I'd love to hear in the chat about how many hours a day in quarantine times do you think you spend on social media? And how does engaging with social media make you feel? So I'll give you a second to put something in the chat there. Too many hours. I don't want to calculate. So not that many. And remember, I'd love to hear how it makes you feel when you catch yourself scrolling and you're reading and you're engaging. 2 to 3 hours. It makes me feel okay only when I'm engaging with people I like and not just scrolling. 3 hours a day at least, it makes me feel awful. Such a time suck for the few good communications that come from it. 1.5 to 2 hours, exciting when it's for my composing, but disheartening when it's just scrolling. Too many. I believe that there are positive aspects of social media, but at the same time, I often feel more isolated by the experience of being on social media. Good. I try to take walks to give me a break from being inside. At points, it makes me feel like a shell. Sometimes I post about that and people seem to like it. Let's say 4-ish per day, including news sites like Reddit. I actually enjoy seeing how my friends are doing, but sometimes I realize, I just watched Potter Puppet Pals on YouTube for an hour. I'm a doom scroller. Me too. So it always makes me anxious. I get most of my news from social media. It's a terrible way to get news. Disheartening when scrolling. It make me anxious. Yeah. So I'm seeing disheartened, anxiety, scrolling, like mindlessness coming up a lot. When it's mindless scrolling, it's emptying, but it's also offering the only connections I have right now. According to Screen Time, I've been on Facebook for 5 hours this week and 3.5 on Tumblr, but others I've been on have been more collaborative. Yeah, so 2 to 5 hours seems like what everybody is, and I'm right in that range as well, especially these days with quarantine. So let's talk about some of these things that you just addressed, of what social media can feel like at its worst. Some of this came up. Performativeness, right? Which leads to inauthenticity. It can be very segregated. And I mean this both in terms of who the algorithm actually allows us to see, in addition to the self-segregation that we allow for ourselves. It's non-geographic. And so by separating us from our geographic community, social media can allow us to shirk our responsibilities to the community that we actually reside in. It's trauma uninformed in a lot of ways, and we're learning. But there's a lot of problematic, traumatizing things that occur on social media. It can be very inaccessible. Again, we're learning here. How do we make our content on social media more accessible for everybody? But, you know, by nature of just internet inequity, a lot of social media can be inaccessible. And I put FOMO on here because that's a feeling that I've experienced a lot with social media. And it didn't directly come up, but I know a lot of people during this time especially have been focused on self-care or mental health throughout quarantine, and you're seeing everybody who's started their new business or throwing themselves into this, or they cleaned their whole house and planted a garden, whatever it is. And that just constant anxiety we get of seeing what other people are doing. And I did see there are a couple new things in the chat. More about lots of time on Zoom. Yeah, absolutely. I've been on Zoom way too much as well. Good. So yeah, these were all the things that I have and continue to experience with social media a lot of the time. That it's performative, that it feels dishonest, that it feels non-transparent. I get sick of the inauthenticity I see a lot. This "I got you, boo" language that we see from people. Or when you start reading a post and you know 2 words in that it's going to be a sale at the end, or a pitch. When you're having a really, truly awful day and your feed is just filled with people who seem to be crushing it, and the ways that those things can feel. Let me just check in with the chat here. Geographic segregation is an interesting point. I'm currently in the States, but I'm sort of based in London at the moment, which is really strange, doing classes online in London. Absolutely. A lot of people, you know, having to take classes at like 2, 3 in the morning their time, in order to keep up. Yeah.
Not quite 2 to 3 in the morning, but I did have some 5 a.m.s, so that was a good time. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's crazy. Yeah, I know I've been a victim of the mindless scrolling through these past couple months. Absolutely. But could social media be? If we leverage it correctly, what could it be? And in my opinion, social media has the potential to be the most adaptive and accessible tool for authentic connection and community building. So yes, it takes us away from our geographic community, which can allow us to shirk responsibilities, but it also connects us with communities that we aren't connected to geographically and wouldn't be connected to otherwise. So, you know, while you're taking classes at 5 in the morning and it's a bummer to be up that early, you're also able to take classes from a location that you wouldn't have been able to otherwise had you been there. Social media at its best could be vulnerable, and it could be authentic. And it could value engagement over this idea of content creation. And for me, that difference comes from the two-way interaction, engagement, versus content creation, the putting it out into the world and they will come. The quality of interaction over the quantity of investment. Let me just check the chat here. Awesome, okay. So social media risks looking an awful lot like classical music performance looks, where we stand on our stage and we put out a great product and we expect that the people will come. That's kind of how we treat social media. We will put out our content, we will create our content, and the people will come, right? That's at its worst. We see a lot of this. We see a lot of this one-way transactional relationship instead of a consideration of the entire design, the entire experience, the entire relationship. So when I am working with clients on social media, these are the questions that I have them explore with themselves. The first is to start teasing out what values you find yourself seeking on social media. So for me, I started to get curious about the accounts that I was drawn to, whether that's the Instagram stories that you always click on, you always watch all the way through, or those Facebook posts that you expand into another tab, even though they're, 18 paragraphs long. The Twitter feeds or the YouTube channels that you're always going out of your way to check, and start to notice how you feel when you engage with those accounts. And such as not to disembody ourselves further, where do you feel that in your body? Does interacting with that place bring you excitement and inspiration? Which I feel here. I feel excitement and fluttering right here. Does it challenge me to think more critically? Do I feel something in my gut when I read that? Does it make me feel calm and at peace? Do I interact with this account and feel my tongue let go of the roof of my mouth? Does it perhaps make you laugh or make you smile when you interact with these accounts? So when I did this for myself, I started to notice that the accounts that I personally was drawn to were about 80% of them were giving me tools for critical thinking and self-betterment. People whose values, opinions I really valued, and I wanted to hear more about what they thought about this thing. Or people who could provide a perspective that I had not lived, that I could learn from. And about 20% of what I was drawn to was grounding and joy. Beautiful moments, great puppy stories, things that brought me moments of childlike joy or peace or humanizing. And this is, not coincidentally at all, exactly in line with my core values. And therefore, it's a good basis for my own social media contributions. So after I've thought a little bit about the value that I'm drawn to, I ask myself and I ask my clients to be intentional in their own posting. So let me read this sentence. When we misrepresent ourselves on social media, we are not only harming others, but we are actively complicit in our own disempowerment. And that was a big lesson for me when it came to my interactions on social media, was that if I was misrepresenting myself, if I was doing something that dehumanized my audience or didn't represent the best of me or didn't represent my values, if I was trying to emulate somebody else's language because I had seen them garner some kind of success, whatever it looked like, I was not only actively harming those that engaged with my content, but I was complicit in my own disempowerment. So there are 3 questions that I ask myself before I post anything on social media. Do I believe deeply, core value-wise, in what I am sharing? Most importantly, I think, what is my desired outcome in sharing this? Is it to show how smart I am? Is it to show how woke I am? Is it to push somebody's button who I just read posted something that annoyed me? Is it vague posting, right? Or is it actually providing some kind of value to somebody in community with me? And figure out what that value is that you think you're providing. And what harm might you be causing? Is that harm in alignment with your values? How could you possibly mitigate any of the harm that you're causing? And thinking just very, very critically about what harm you might be creating. So I found that when I actually started to ask these questions, I realized that I should be posting a lot more of other people's content than I was. That actually was really important to me to amplify other people in my community, to celebrate the people in my community who were doing things I believed in. And then it became a lot more of that than it was just my own content creation. So I started really thinking about how I could curate the experience for people who interacted with my social media, and use social media in a way that was authentic, meaningful, and community affirming. And the third thing that I have clients think about is how can they carry this relationship off of social media? Social media is wonderful when we use it right. But anytime that we can take relationships that we've built on social media and carry them off of social media into some other platform, that's when we really start to live an authentic human life. So I have friends who I have never seen IRL, who I've never touched, who I've never been in the same state as, who are some of my closest friends and most important collaborators and colleagues. But you bet that we're getting on Skype. You bet that we're getting on the phone with each other. Because for me, social media is wonderful, but it is transactional. At the root of it, it's transactional. And so if we want to create a multifaceted, two-way, deep, meaningful connection, we have to figure out how to take it off of social media at some point. I'm just going to check in with the chat here.
Zoe, can I ask a question about
Absolutely.
that? I don't know if I can type it out into the chat distinctly
Yeah, who
enough.
is this speaking? I'm sorry.
This is Dale.
Hi, Dale.
Hi. So something that I sometimes like struggle with in seeing other people who like hearing all of this, that your approach to social media, I'm realizing I have friends who I feel like probably follow this approach. Like I have friends who are very good at like creating this kind of social media persona that does like everything that you're talking about. Like they're very carefully curating what they're sharing, they're amplifying voices that they find important. And like on the one hand, I definitely value that in those people, but on the other hand, I do also sometimes finding myself like seeing that almost as a form of inauthenticity because it feels so curated. And I wonder if that's something that like I just need to deal with on my own, if that's like a me problem, which means like when I start thinking about social media this way, as I probably should, like should I not worry about people looking at it that way, or should I be doing something to like mitigate that like worry that other people might find it inauthentic if I'm operating in this hyper curated way?
So that's a really, really important point. And I know what you're talking about, especially these last few months with the conversations around Black Lives Matter, and around a lot of the problems that COVID-19 has created. I have seen a lot of performative wokeness, as I call it, right? Where people perform how intentional they are and they perform how ethical they are. And, you know, it makes me feel some kind of way. It sounds like it makes you feel some kind of way too. And I will say that I had to work through a lot of this these last few months with myself, of exactly the questions you're asking. Is this a me problem? Why am I reacting to this the way it is? Is this harming me? Am I just reacting from my own performativity? Am I reacting from a place where I'm like, well, I'm better than that, or I don't do that? And really having to ask some of these hard questions. At the end of the day, I think that The only person who will know whether you are truly being authentic or not is yourself. And not everybody is somebody who authentically needs to share every Black Lives Matter post, or authentically needs, that's not everybody. We're not all the same. And so some people can post the exact same post. Let's say 2 people post the exact same thing. One person might have done it from a place of authenticity because they said, I know that the people I'm in community with need to read this, and that when I share it, they'll be open to it. And they know that I'm available for follow-up conversation if this makes them feel some kind of way. And somebody else might share the exact same thing or post the exact same thing. And they did it from a place where they're like, I don't want to be challenged on this. I already know that everybody's going to see this, agrees with me. I'm just posting it so that people will clap me on the back for whatever. So that's why these questions are helpful for me, is to always really go back to what is my desired outcome? What am I actually trying to get out of posting this? And that's how I know if I'm being performative or if I'm actually being authentic. Does that kind of respond to your point, Dale?
I think so, yeah. Yeah.
Do you have more thoughts about it, or?
No, like not that are useful to air like in this format. It's more like I need to think more on it. Thank you though. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that into the space. I think authenticity is super tough because you can be the most authentic person in the world and somebody else thinks that you're inauthentic, and vice versa, right? And so at the end of the day, as long as we are sharing from a place where we have meaningful intention and we've thought intentionally about the harm that we might be caused and tried to mitigate that, and as long as we're open to hearing feedback and we're open to changing and we're open to apologizing if we do unintentionally cause harm, we're the only person who can know whether we're acting with intention and with authenticity. So it's important, I think all of you probably have already thought about this or know this, but I think it's important to bring into this space the difference between intention and impact. Or between intent and impact. So I talk a lot about intentionality and doing things with the right intention, but we can do absolutely everything with the right intention and still have harmful impact. And so at the end of the day, coming back to our values, if we cause harm, regardless of what our intention was and how closely aligned we are with our values, we have to be prepared to learn. We have to be prepared to grow. We have to be prepared to authentically apologize. So we can ask all these questions and really think really hard about what we post and still cause harm at the end of the day. And if you are told that you caused harm, that's a blessing, because I bet all of us have posted something harmful and never heard about it. And so we didn't get the opportunity to learn and not post that again, or not do that, or not say that, or not share that, or not believe something that was causing harm. So for people to call us on our stuff is a gift, is a blessing. There's another question here from Andrew saying, how do you respond to people who say that not focusing on the purpose of your brand confuses your audience? I find that I want to display myself authentically, but that can spread across numerous topics that might not seem related to my brand as being a musician. So this is 100% going to be my opinion on this, but I believe that the period we are in now with music entrepreneurship and music influencer culture and music social media culture, where we see people have to be super niched and super focused and they have only their content pillars and those are only the things they share, is going to be behind us soon. And we're going to start looking for the wholeness of humanity. And we're going to start looking for people who draw connections and synthesize all the different parts of their human experience. We're not quite there yet. And so, there's mixed results in existing this way online. So the way that I've approached this is to think of myself as a pioneer for how I want to see social media. I want to share that I am fascinated by yoga and that I love practicing yoga, because to me, yoga is an essential part of how I approach entrepreneurship. I want to share the time I spent with my puppy this morning, because that's a part of my experience in my life. I think a lot about what we value in college acceptances. So 10 years ago, we wanted well-rounded. 15 years ago, we wanted well-rounded students, right? They were looking for the student that did a little bit of this community service and a little bit of music and a little bit of math and a little bit of this and a little bit of that and did great at all of it, and athletics and whatever. And then there was a shift about when I was applying to colleges about 10 years ago, where they started to want the finely pointed student, where colleges started to look for the person who was like, I love this one thing. And so I did 100 different clubs related to that one thing. And I poured myself into this one thing. And now we're starting to see this pivot again in college acceptances of looking for students who are members of a community, who have thrown themselves into things, who are kind of a balance between that. They didn't do one sport and one art and one this and one that. But they also didn't just like go, I play the flute and that's what I do and I'm the best at it. We're starting to see this balance between that. And I think that we'll see that reflected in our social media spaces as well, where we're going to stop being like, I follow this person because they only post about inversions or yoga, or this person only posts about dancing while playing the clarinet. I'm already finding the accounts that I'm enjoying following these days are entire humans. And it makes me trust them. It makes me trust them because I know their story. We hear this brings, you mentioned confusing your audience. And I think that this comes back to the way that we dehumanize our audience and we don't show them respect. I have never looked at somebody's social media and gone, I'm just confused about what they do. I don't understand, and like short-circuited. That's never happened to me. And if it's happened to you, let me know. But it's never happened to me. And I think that this is another tendency to just not trust that our audience or the people that are interacting with us on social media are smart humans who can understand multifaceted existences and might even appreciate seeing somebody who looks a lot like them on social media and who shares values with them. Does that respond to your question, Dewey?
Yes.
Okay.
Extremely well. I got a good laugh out of your short circuiting. You've never short circuited. That's a good point.
Can I jump in?
Yes, please.
I wanted to ask because
Who is this speaking? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, Lily. Hi. I wanted to ask because I feel like a lot of the values in terms of like figuring out what social media is nourishing as opposed to depleting, it all kind of points to like figuring out who you might want to be friends with. It just seems like the most authentic interactions on social media are all based off of like, would I like this person as a friend? Would I trust them? And I was also thinking about what you were saying, Dale, earlier, when sort of the whole like reevaluating of humanity happened earlier in June. I found that myself and a lot of my friends were scrambling to find like posts to educate ourselves, and then people were sharing things with each other, and it was just like telephone, and people were just passing these things back and forth. And with that, they were also highlighting artists of color who I would have never have come across before and things like that. And so thinking of it as something that's just like, I'm sharing this thing with people that I like is maybe a more relaxed way of doing it. But at the same time, I was wondering whether that's the best approach, because there can probably be some sort of like, I feel like there might be more mistakes that could be made that way. And if people are scared of being called out or of offending other people, then that's also something to be cautious of. So I guess I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so a lot of ideas, a lot of thoughts in there, which is important. And I think I remember exactly what you're talking about. The month afterwards, there was this like scramble to share information and to share context, and there are definitely positives to that. You mentioned a lot of them. You mentioned being introduced to people that you wouldn't have been in community with before, being introduced to resources that you might not have been aware of before. And those are all wonderful things. There was also a lot of performativity that we saw during that time. There was, let's just briefly mention the black squares that we saw everywhere, and the actual literal harm that caused to the organizing community. And these questions. What is my desired outcome for posting that? A lot of people, if they've been honest with themselves and asked that question, would say, I'm posting this to show that I support Black Lives Matter, to show that I'm woke and I get it. And that's an ego desired outcome, right? That's not a community first outcome. That's an ego first outcome. And this is not to make anybody feel bad who may have posted it, because lots of people did. Lots of people that I love, adore, and respect posted that black square. But if we were honest with ourselves about why we posted things like that, it was performative. It wasn't about actually helping our community. So that's an example where we want to just think a little more intentionally and a little more cautiously about why we're actually sharing this. And are we doing it to perform our own existence, to perform our values, or are we actually doing it to provide a value to somebody else? So again, though, to your point, like, intent and impact are not the same thing, and it can be the other way around from what I brought up before, where somebody can post something with the intent of being performative and lifting themselves up, but the impact it had was to actually help somebody else learn about something, to become aware of something. So, what do we do then? Well, all we can do is curate our own experience on there of what we choose to engage with, what value we're seeking, what value we want to provide to other people. So yeah, a lot of good things that you brought up in there, and I think it's just very complicated, and there's no right. There's a lot of wrong ways to do social media. I'm not sure there's any one right way to do it, but I just, if we take anything out of this, it's for all of us to just think very, very critically before we post about it being a community building, rather than a transactional or performative thing. For me, everything comes back to the community. That's really the thesis of everything that I'm sharing with you today, is everything I bring it back to my community, and my community that I know better than anybody else, and I'm an expert on because I'm a member of it, my rules of community, and only I can be the expert on my place in my community. Does that speak to some of the things that you brought up?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Do you have any thoughts or follow-up questions at this point?
I guess I just wanted to get a little more clarity on like the friendship aspect of it, like treating people as like individuals as opposed to sort of like people that you want to work with. I mean, I know that there's a difference between professional relationships and close relationships, but being able to have that kind of authenticity with all of it might be good. I don't know. This is a big unanswered question I've been thinking about a lot. So
absolutely, it's a good question for us all to sit with. There's a Sonia Renee Taylor, who wrote "The Body Is Not an Apology," has a great line where she reminds people that people are not resources. And I think that that's another thing that we do, that it doesn't allow people to be friends in people. We are like, I was introduced to this person who's a great resource for whatever. And so then that's what leads to all of these things we are confronting as a society now, like cancel culture. So cancel culture comes out of this idea that people cannot be people. They have to be perfect, infallible resources for whatever it is that we want them to be and we want them to stand for. And if they accidentally let us behind the curtain to see that they're a person, then we cancel them. There's more, it's obviously more complicated when it comes into people who are actually actively inflicting harm and things like that. But this idea that people have to be so defensive against admitting that they're making mistakes causes more harm, in my opinion. If we could all be more willing to say that we made a mistake and we messed up, we'd probably cause a lot less harm in being brave and being vulnerable. So for me, when I go onto social media, I want to know the people who are interacting with me. I want to know something about them. I want to know what it is they enjoy. I'm like just as interested in what kind of pets they have as I am in what resource they can be to me, right? And that's a hard thing to do because the whole way that social media is set up is to be transactional and dehumanizing. We have likes and we have followers. And, we're moving away from Facebook where it's friends and it's two-way, and we're moving towards Twitter and Instagram where it's followers and it's literally one way, where people can consume you and you have no access to them. And that's a frightening thing that I think we need to be very thoughtful as we make that move just in the platforms that we use. So I just have one more quick aspect I want us all to think about, and that's this idea of startups and of this idea that everybody starts their own thing. Everybody can start their own ensemble. Everybody can start their own nonprofit. Everybody can start their own business. Everybody's offering online courses. Everybody's giving products online. Everybody's giving their 30-page handout for how to do whatever, which is both a good and a bad thing. And I like this image because I totally imagine that the children of our generation will play startup games when they're growing up and doing their crafts. So that's the world that we live in. So startup culture at its worst, this idea that everybody can start their own thing, is totally ego-driven. It totally can be. And it leads to a depletion of resources. When you have 30 people in a community who all want to start their own chamber ensemble, let's say, you have all these young, under-resourced organizations fighting over already limited funding, already limited spaces, already limited support, already limited attention within their community. And at its worst, startup culture is absolutely contributing to saviorism, and specifically white saviorism. The idea of helping cultures and helping communities that you do not belong to as a way of forwarding your own career. And so a metaphor that I come back to again and again when I think of startups is indigenous farming versus colonizer farming. So when my ancestors came to this country and colonized it and committed massive acts of violence on indigenous people, they did not recognize the farming that was here as farming because it did not look like westernized white farming. Indigenous farming is sustainable, and it's, let's plant a little bit of this crop and a little bit of this crop and a little bit of this crop that will all sustain each other. Therefore, we can protect this soil and use it again next year for whatever it is. Colonizer farming is, let's plant this one crop as much as we can and yield as much out of this soil and as much out of this land to grow as much wheat or as much corn or whatever it is as we can in nice, neat little rows. And then we will run out of nutrients in the soil. We'll have to burn down these forests. We'll have to, that. And so we didn't even recognize indigenous farming for what it was. And so I think about that when I think of startup culture, because it looks an awful lot like that. Instead of thinking, what is the unique role that I can give to this ecosystem of arts here? We think, how can I make a name for myself and start my own thing and compete with everybody else for the resources that I need for my thing to be as successful as possible. But at its best, this also should be community-oriented. We should think, what does my community need and how can I offer that? We should think about the stakeholders in our community. So stakeholders are anybody in your community, any organization or individual that might be already heavily invested in the thing that you want to be doing. We should be thinking way more than we are about the barriers to access and barriers to engagement with our ideas. That includes marginalized groups such as the elderly or minors, minorities, poor or differently abled or other socially excluded groups. It also means thinking about community infrastructure, contested or divided communities, rural isolation, access to information, literacy and numeracy levels, and the dominance of oral culture. And these are all things that we need to be considering if we really truly want to start our own thing and meet a community need. And we could see greater humanism and greater innovation and creativity in an increasingly automated world. This is what it could be at its best. So when people approach me and they say, I want to start my own ensemble, I want to start my own business, I want to start my own online whatever, these are the questions that we go over together. Could you combine forces with someone or something that's already established? that already has some resources, already has some support, already has the trust of its community. Be honest with yourself. Why do you actually want it to be your thing? Is it because the thing that you can offer to your community truly doesn't exist, or doesn't exist in your community, or has got it wrong, or you can do it for a different group or a different type or a different way? Or is it because you want to make a name for yourself? Is it for the community? Is it for your own ego? And we should all ask ourselves if we're being a savior. Are we going into the community we already belong to, we already have trust in, that we already understand how it operates? Or are we trying to go into a community with which we have no intimate knowledge or understanding and offer some kind of service? And that's when we run into problems of saviorism. So, like I said before, here's all my contact information. Follow me on social media, and I'll try to do my best every day to be intentional in practicing what we talked about here. My email is there. If you want the core value exercise that helps you to kind of get clear about your core values, you can email me and I can send that to you. And I have a Facebook group called Community Oriented Music Making that's all just about asking these questions and having conversations around what does it mean to bring musicians back into the community and to truly combine community care with artistic practice. So I'm going to leave my contact information up for just a second and look here at what's in the chat box. What if we looked for people who are already doing the work we wanted to see and contributed to their communities? I'm sure we're getting to that point. Yep, exactly. So is there somebody already there who's doing what we want to do? And our unique qualifications and interests and passions can lend to that and further that mission. And then can you speak just a little about the dominance of oral culture? Absolutely. So a great example of this in classical music is the way that we've structured call for scores. And the way that we expect a Western notated score to be sent to us. And the way that we expect that to look, and how many brilliant composers this leaves out of the equation that don't even get to ask to be a part of our community or ask to be a part of this experience, because our entire understanding of Western classical music is it ignores oral culture, and it's all about the written word, and it's all about the written music. I'm gonna stop my screen share here so I can see faces again. All right, and I'm gonna stop yapping now. If anybody has any questions, you're here in the Zoom room and you wanna unmute yourself and talk, that would be great. It's been so wonderful to be here.
Maybe not a question per se, but I thought it was really interesting what you were saying about the black squares, because I kind of felt something similar. And it's like, I mean, I want to support people, but I also don't think this is the right way of doing it. So then you have to navigate and I guess find what is sort of the best way that you can do it in a way that you feel that is actually helpful. I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me, the question for me is less, is this the right way to do it? And more, do I understand why I am doing this? And it might be the right way for that other person to express what they're expressing or to seek the results that they're seeking. But when I made the choice not to share the black square, for instance, it's because I didn't know how to justify why I was doing it. If somebody questioned me on it and they said, why did you share this? I'm not sure I would have had an answer that I could stand behind myself. And so if I don't understand why I'm doing it, I'm not going to do it just because everybody else is and I want to get in there. That doesn't mean it was the wrong thing to do. It means it was the wrong thing for me to do.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else have thoughts or questions?
You, oops, sorry, go ahead, Lily.
This is not a question. I just wanted to say this is all really gratifying to hear. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for saying all of this stuff and kind of structuring all of these feelings that I feel like I've been having about this world. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
You brought up how social media disconnects us from our geographic communities. And I feel like that's especially true with like everything being Zoom based and online and quarantined. And I was like, before coronavirus, going to try and build a community within my geographic region. And I was wondering if you had any like insight how to like encourage enthusiasm into that and still build that community, even though it seems like it's counterintuitive right now.
For the geographic community specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually there were a couple great comments in the chat that I didn't get to bring into the space about people who have actually found greater connection with their geographic community through social media, which is absolutely possible and can absolutely be done on there. And that, I think, is the only way it can really be done safely right now. For instance, I have been connecting with local farmers and local farmers markets through social media right now, which is something I've always wanted to be able to do, and to feel like my food consumption was more ethical in that way, but something that I don't feel safe going somewhere and doing right now, but I felt safe finding a community group on social media for that. It's, creating, again, the same thing with Facebook groups that I said about startups. Does the group already exist? Could you bring what you are interested to into a group that already has 1,000 people active in it, who are invested, who care about it? Are you making your own Facebook group just to make a name for yourself and just to perform your own career in a controlled environment? Or do you really see something missing in your community? And you're like, I think there are people out there who share this value with me and share this investment in our community, and I want to put us in a similar space. Then, create your own group, create your own community online, whether it's a Facebook group or wherever else, that brings these people with shared interests and shared values into a shared space, because communities are built up of the strengths of all of the community members. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
I also just wanted to say, kind of along the lines of what Lily said about like how gratifying it is to hear entrepreneurship talked about like this, because you're bringing up those words at the beginning, and those are the words that like honestly induced so much anxiety in me. And then hearing your approach, I'm all like, this is so much better. Like I'm not filled to the brim with anxiety like I am when I read entrepreneurship books. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's gratifying for me to hear that, because that's the instinct that I've had for a while too, was like, I was good at this stuff and I was good at playing the game, and it still caused me this just like anxiety, and being able to put the language to it and make these observations myself of just how dehumanizing all of this is and how it doesn't need to be, and how we just need to come back to the community has been very helpful for me personally in my own mental health and career journey.
So sorry, my camera's being weird, so disembodied voice with whatever this internet is. But I was thinking a lot like in regards to a lot of like the community stuff. Like my area, it's not like super rural. Like we have a hospital in town, but like there are definitely areas like near me that are pretty rural. Like there's a school that has, I think their graduating class this year is 35. But pretty small areas. So a lot of like the community stuff definitely seems to be focused on a lot more urban areas, especially like with social media, like, oh, hey, we're having this event in town. Well, for some of us, in town is like a half an hour away. So I definitely think social media has the power, at least for communities like mine, to sort of bring us together in more of a, not necessarily a physical space, but in a more accessible way than versus other areas where if they maybe don't have that ability to be connected in like larger urban areas, like a physical space is more accessible versus for us, like if you don't have a car, you literally can't do anything type deal. And I definitely thought it was interesting, a lot of like how starkly different that experience is between like someone coming from a rural area versus someone coming from a far more urban area and far more urban experience.
Absolutely. One of the I don't live in Pittsburgh actually. I live in a little borough called Avalon that's about a 20-minute drive to Pittsburgh. And a lot of my work is in Pittsburgh, so I feel like that's where I'm at. But one of the most interesting things I've seen is this prominence of, if you guys know Nextdoor, it's a social media that's meant to be geographic. So I'm on Nextdoor with Avalon, which is my borough, and Bellevue, which is the next borough. And we have our own Nextdoor. And so, it's a lot of like, my cat got out, neighbors, can you help me find my cat? It's a lot of, for instance, tomorrow I'm giving a porch recital for my neighbors. I haven't even posted on Facebook about it because that's not who it's for. I've posted on Nextdoor because I want my neighbors to come out of their front door and get to hear a concert. And honestly, to be transparent with you, before coronavirus, it would never have occurred to me to give a concert here in Avalon because that's not where people play their concerts, right? But of course, that's who I should be playing for. I should be playing for the people who are dropping veggies off at my door and who are, helping us when our dog gets out and runs up the street. Like, those are the people I want to be making music for. And so I do think that tools are coming into fruition, like Nextdoor, that are allowing us to connect geographically, but still through social media.
Okay, house is loud now. Yeah, certainly like that type of stuff. And like even with like entrepreneurship, in regards to the rest of this conversation. And I would also like to add that it was, like others have said, very gratifying for, making entrepreneurship like, okay, this isn't an evil horror upon the world anymore. This is a thing people can do. Like around here, you can try to be an entrepreneur, but ultimately it's the things, like it's the more corporate things that make the world run. Like one of our little townships was barely holding on. And, for a lot of the older folks over there, they only can stay independent because now there's a Dollar General in town. And that's like the coolest thing to them. Mm-hmm. So certainly like I said, that stark difference has been really interesting to see, definitely over the course of this festival with other people around as well.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up two really important things. One is that this festival is a great example of the strength of non-geographic community, that all of you were able to be a member of the zFestival community without having to be in the same geographic space. And that's unprecedented and wonderful, and like one of the things that I'm most excited about with this specific community and this festival. And then you also mentioned, the Dollar General is going to win out over a recital hall every time, which is a sentiment we've all confronted this month or this year, which is that we are not essential workers. We are not essential. And one of the things I've seen come up in music entrepreneurship over the last few months that has really grated against me is everybody trying to prove that the arts are actually essential. Because the truth is, right now, they are not. And I know that that's I know that there'll be some pushback on that. But right now, as it stands in the 2020, where we're facing an economic crisis and the epidemic of racism and the pandemic of COVID-19 all converging simultaneously, music is not essential. Is it important? Do we adore it? Do we need it to feel human? Absolutely. Is it feeding anybody or putting them in a home or stopping them from being murdered? It's not. And I think that if we deny that and we try to stretch arguments for why we're essential, that's further dehumanization, and it's a further lack of honesty and transparency about how the world functions. The truth is that we're fighting for a world where the arts are the essential thing. We're fighting for a future where all of these other things, where everybody has equitable access to the things that they need, right, to meet the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, so that we can live a human experience that's focused on joy and meaning and significance and connection. Those are the things that we in the arts provide. But I do think that it's our job in entrepreneurship, in the arts, to be honest, that, yeah, we're not the most essential thing right now. And that's, if we're willing to say that, then there can be less shame around working a 9 to 5 that's not in music. There can be less shame in general, less shame about what you need to do to survive while you're making music.
I wanted to ask a question. I just wanted to say also this talk really came at a perfect time for me because I've been like, oh, can anyone hear me?
Yes, but I can't see who is talking. There you are.
Oh, it's me, Julian.
Hi, Julian.
Yeah, I had to go and make lunch, but I made it. Because I get really hungry in the 12 to 2 hour. My mom is playing an instrument. I can't stop her. Sorry. Anyway, this talk came at a really good time because I've been pondering starting my own virtual thing for a while now. I just haven't I've just been waiting on answers to certain questions and thinking about oh, what do I do? So I'm really thankful because I think this talk was just so cool. It was so cool. Really, really, thank you so much. I had a question about failure. There are lots of movies about failure, like Meet the Robinsons or whatever, and it's you have to try it so you can fail and get better at it. But still, I worry about it. I worry about starting this ensemble, and then I try to do stuff, and then I realize that oh no, I didn't fit my original mission. I don't have enough of a diverse group of people doing this, or I don't, or I couldn't put this together or whatever. I just worry about that. And I've started things before, but it's totally different when it's virtual with people all around the world and when it's with a solid group of people on a college campus, What kind of words would you have to talk about that?
Yeah, it's really important. I'm glad that you brought failure into the space. The problem with the movies about failure is that they fail once, overcome it, and then live happily ever after, right? There's a sense of arrival, that we arrive at post-failure existence, and we definitely don't. So, I said I started an ensemble a year into my master's that for several years was very conflated with my sense of identity. That was what I did. I ran this ensemble, and it was incredibly important to me. And my success, my sense of identity hinged on this ensemble. And making the decision to step away was one of the more difficult things that I've ever had to do. Making the decision that I am so proud of the time that I spent with that organization, but continuing with that organization wasn't the thing that was going to bring me closer to being authentically me. And that's a really, really tough choice to make, but I'm on the other side of having made the decision and having found what comes next for me, and I couldn't be happier. And I don't consider any of the time that I spent with that organization to be wasted effort at all, because I wouldn't have been prepared to do the research that I'm sharing with you today and to explore these things and have the curiosity about that had I not run this organization for 5 years. So will you fail? Yes. The words I would have for you are that it doesn't matter, that you will, and that it's going to be okay. Excuse me. And that you don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to be an expert, and you don't have to be anything more than the human that you are, anything less than the human that you are. This is, it's capitalism and it's patriarchy and it's white supremacy that have taught us that we have to have all the answers. And that we have to be infallible, and that we have to arrive at what we are and then divest that to other people. And it's a battle because we've been acculturated to believing that our whole lives. But the more that you can just show up in all of your authenticity and all of your humanity every day and expect to be in relationship with people and expect to make mistakes and expect to adapt and grow and evolve, that to me feels like a much safer and a much more exciting place to be than having to be defensive and be an expert.
I have a
question.
Oh man, I keep doing that. I
Okay,
have
do it. You go. I'll go after.
Question to that, because failure, I know failure is inevitable, but when it comes to entrepreneurship, it seems like failure leads to lost money that you didn't have to begin with. So how do you confront? I know it's not necessarily always you have to spend money to make money, but there are projects that just require money. So how do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah, so we're talking about trying to lead anti-capitalist lives within capitalism, right? And the reality at the end of the day is that you got to make rent and you got to buy your food, and you know, you need you need money to survive under capitalism, and that is the reality. And that's why, you know, I started this by saying I will never disparage anybody doing what they need to do to survive under capitalism and to make the money that they do. I am aware that my pursuit of greater ethics and greater morality has required so much privilege just to be able to even ask these questions. And so for myself, and Peter and Shoshana can attest to this, I come very unashamed about talking about the monetary value of things. I come into a space and I say, you know, this is what I'm doing. I think that this has value for whatever reason, and it doesn't have to be because other people told me it has value. It doesn't be because they gave me this diploma or they gave me this award or whatever. It's because I believe it has value. And if you too believe it has value, this is the value I've assigned to it. How does this transaction sound to you? And to I think the less shame we can have around talking about those things. You know, I want to get paid for the work I do. I also want the work I do to be ethical. And it's a really tough, you and I have talked about this, Dewey, like one-on-one a little bit. It's a really tough, impossible balance to strike, because to be truly ethical, I wouldn't live here in capitalism in the 21st century. I wouldn't. There is no ethical consumption under capitalism. But we can be more aligned with our values and more ethical. So I'm going to take gigs at churches that give sermons that I don't believe are healthy because I need to pay my bills. But then when I have that flexibility that I'm going to reap from playing those church gigs, I'm going to use it to consult with this business about how to be less discriminatory in their practices. And so for me, it's, you know, it's a personal question, but for me, that's how I confront it, is like, I'm going to go do this thing I might not believe in, but then I'm going to try to give back to this other thing that I do believe in.
Okay, thanks.
Absolutely.
So my question, or I don't know, thought, I guess, that I was having, is I like completely agree that, like, why start something if there's a community that's already doing that, and if you do then go and restart this is really just like an ego trip. But I keep thinking that, like, the people who are most likely to come to the conclusion that they have a distinctly unique perspective is going to be like a white heterosexual cisgendered man. So, like, how do we avoid, you know, how do we both avoid going on these ego trips and starting these passion projects that are for us and not the community, but also avoiding this future where then the only organizations that are left are headed by this white man, this patriarchal structure. I don't know, I guess, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Absolutely. That's a great point, because it's going to be the people who have been reinforced and acculturated to believe that they are a unique snowflake their whole lives, right? Mm-hmm. That will believe that they have. And I think this is where what's important for me is to value perspective as much as I value, or more than I value, the things that white supremacy patriarchy have handed us, the diplomas and the certifications and the trainings and the awards and all of these things that are passed down. So when I'm talking with somebody and I'm trying to figure out if they have something unique to offer and they have something, I'm looking at whether they have a different perspective or a different lived experience in deciding whether to encourage them. And I think as consumers, we have to think critically like that as well. Of seeking not the person with the most accolades on their resume, but the person who has the different perspectives and the different lived experiences and the different practices and the different ethics and the different values. And that, for me, it comes back to values again, and it comes back to story and placing those in higher regard than the awards that we currently hand out as a society.
I think if Shoshi and Peter agree that we can continue to talk, but this might be a good point to just like take the live stream off. Do Yins agree?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Yins.
But thank you, Zoe. I already expressed how much I appreciate this, and those of you on YouTube who didn't see the chat, there's a lot of people who have similar sentiments. So thank you so much. I'm going to now hit the stop live stream button. I'll give it a buffer of just a few minutes. But thank you so much for coming.
Bye, YouTube.